Gordon Bennett was born in the regional Queensland town of Monto in 1955. And as many of you know, his career began as an artist in the late 1980s when he graduated from Queensland College of Art in Brisbane, aged in his early 30s. These years coincided with the bicentenary of the arrival of Captain Cook, the culture wars, and an increased focus on Indigenous sovereignty and native title in Australia, all events which were keenly felt by this artist. Bennett's work intentionally challenges accepted notions of history and identity, in particular, the Western worldview responsible for representations of colonisation. The artist's concerns were influenced by his late discovery of his own Aboriginality, as well as by post-colonial politics. Today, we're going to address his practice almost chronologically, with examples from the exhibition. The discussion will reflect really how you might experience the show and range over ideas how he worked through stages in series of works, employing visual quotation and representations of Australian history, and the work of local and international artists to suggest new meanings and to challenge orthodoxies. We hope that this talk will indicate why Bennett's practice continues to be an important part, not only of contemporary Australian art, but also conversations on society, and how it remains a provocation for us to reflect on how we might enter a genuinely post-colonial world. A number of ideas explored in Bennett's early works, particularly the complexities of personal identity in relation to family and culture, continue as enduring concerns throughout his practice. Bennett tells the story of coming to realise his own divided cultural heritage in his essay, The Manifesto, written in 1996. His English father had led him to believe he had purely Anglo-Celtic ancestry, but as a young adult, Bennett learnt from his mother's Indigenous background, Through his own life experience, Bennett recognised the prejudice that led his mother to disavow her Aboriginal heritage after being sent to live on Cherbourg Aboriginal Mission in Queensland, where it was intended that she assimilate into urban society. As a person living between cultures, Bennett made it clear that he worked from the position of someone educated and living in a European system, a worldview that often excludes other perspectives, especially Indigenous culture and history. And in fact, later on in life, Bennett would claim that he wanted to be known as a contemporary artist and refused to be identified as an Indigenous artist. In this work, Untitled Nuance of 1992, Bennett plays with his self-portrait to encourage viewers to recognise the impact of social, cultural, and historical attitudes on how they see or perceive others. Employing visual opposites such as black and white or figures of self and other allowed Bennett to signal opposing perspectives and create a space to unsettle predetermined ways of knowing the world, a strategy found throughout his practice, in which the viewer is left to reconcile ideas in his pictorial language. This shaping of personal consciousness between two worlds is analogous to a game of chess in Bennett's installation Psychodrama of 1990, the title a word that he often used. The installation has a photograph of each of his parents facing off across a checkerboard. In front of his mother, you see two kitsch Aboriginalia figures, commonly found in homes when Gordon was growing up. And in front of the father, a classical sculpture, and next to him, a small watercolour of a black angel. Psychodrama represents a game of chance in which nature and culture and black and white are seemingly in contest. This work, Diptych, is a very early but large-scale painting showing a preoccupation with conflicting or contrary worldviews. Its iconography of a cityscape, barred windows, the burning gunya and barely visible slang words for Indigenous people in Australia signal concerns that were quickly developed into sophisticated statements by this artist. Bennett violently disliked racist representations and the way that they perpetuate a colonial mindset. Painted in the same year, you can see how he quickly developed his practice. The coming of the light represents a pivotal moment in Bennett's early career, when a coherent visual language and use of quotation becomes readily identifiable, with a visual strategy of leaving open contradictions for the viewer to recognise and reconsider. The central concerns of his early practice are present in this painting. the pervasive systems of thought, especially evident in language, which he personally experienced to cause alienation and discrimination. The children's building blocks are symbolic of abbreviations of the system that could define people in terms of derogatory ideas, such as particularly abo, bung, kun, and darky. Language, a convention of arbitrary sounds and symbols, which was also central to theories of semiotics, which Bennett was immersing himself in at the time, is a relentless force in its categorization of people. Envisaging the symptoms of nation that he wished to change, Bennett also quotes from New Zealand artist Colin McCann's Elias series of paintings, Will He Come to Save Him? The light, in the title, has multiple references to not only the arrival of Christian missionaries in the Torres Strait Islands in 1871, but also the white Aboriginal European the white Anglo-European populace behind the picket fences, expecting enlightenment, lit by liberty's torch. Bennett didn't absolve himself or anyone else of any behaviour and highlighted the visual and other languages with which we make meaning. Being conscious of the way that his education, including the narratives of Australian national history that he'd been taught, were conditioned by Anglo-European thought, Bennett took an ironic and disruptive approach in what he termed his history paintings that addressed the dominant myth of Australia. He said, and I quote, "I see much of my work as history painting, not as documentary history painting, but rather that which investigates the way history is constructed after the event, always mediated by someone's point of view that reflects a Eurocentric bias." He also thought of these paintings as a type of psychogeography or a landscape of the mind, both individual and collective, as in a national mindset, based on his understanding of psychological theories that discuss the separate conscious and unconscious aspects of existence. The idea behind exposing the partial assumptions on which history is based, and within that the consequences of creating a national psyche based on partial attitudes, was to encourage an awareness of how this sensibility comes at the expense of others, and to provoke greater openness to seeing places and people differently. The concepts of land as terra nullius and its First Nation people as primitive or noble savages that have been presumed in many histories of Australia are some of the implications addressed in Bennett's examination of history. In this painting, triptych, Requiem of Grandeur, Empire, it's shaped like a Christian altarpiece. The portrait of Truganini on the left, apocryphally known as the last Tasmanian Aborigine, is a ghostly presence. She hovers over a landscape painted from photos of human anatomy and occupied by Western science in the figure of perspective grids and a triumphal arch. The figure of Bennett's mother in the centre painting is trapped within this Western worldview. Myth of the Western Man, White Man's Burden, is one of Bennett's complex history paintings. The myth referred to in the title is that of the pioneer, explorer or settler, a hero of Australian history as taught in schools and ingrained in Australian identity. The harried figure stands at the centre of a maelstrom, a symbol of an official history under threat from the facts it has chosen to obscure or disregard. The abstract background refers to the painting Blue Poles of 1952 by American abstract expressionist Jackson Pollock, as does the tongue-in-cheek pole that the explorer holds. The purchase of Pollock's painting by the National Gallery of Australia in 1972 caused great controversy due to its unprecedented price, and the work has since been associated with the ideals and tribulations of the Whitlam government. The scattered flags in the painting each contain a date. The earliest is 1788 at the lower centre, where the Australian colony was established and its flag raised. The next, 1796, the year when the first legally sanctioned massacre of Indigenous people in the Hawkesbury River area occurred. And so on it goes, as you can see on the list on the right-hand side. Many of these dates refer to murders, massacres, and desecrations of Aboriginal graves and the denial of land rights. They continue until 1992, the year Bennett painted this work, and when the Mabo case was won, and the concept of Australia as terra nullius, or an empty land, was officially overturned. In his aim of unsettling conventional structures and attitudes, in works such as Big Romantic Painting, Apotheosis of Captain Cook of 1993, Bennett ignored conventional three-dimensional perspective in favour of all-over compositions without a central focus. Big Romantic Painting requires the viewer to consider details that are spread across the image, including the roundels Bennett thought of as sites of identification, part of the visual imagery that he highlighted as subjective and open to multiple meanings. The figure of the drowning white pioneer at the midpoint appears in a number of these history paintings. The figure seems to be searching for an unknown centre or an imagined inland sea. The idea a European folly in which the coloniser imagines ideas about a land they do not know as a place to be owned or conquered. Bennett took the idea from a 1958 social studies book on explorers of Australia like John Oxley. These mindsets he evoked are in contrast with an Indigenous worldview that embraces the land and its history as part of people's culture. Unaware of people in the land, the male figure at the centre sees only ghostly handprints. At the top left, Britannia and Captain Cook descend, the image taken from the 1794 engraving, The Apotheosis of Cook, by Philippe Jacques de Lautherbourg. De Lautherbourg's etching was already an appropriation, being after a Charles Weber drawing. Instead of emerging from the fumes of battle, though, Cook and Britannia appear in the inhabitants' campfire smoke. The spiral of appropriations doesn't end there. De Lautherbourg's figure of Cook was based on another famous painting, American artist Benjamin West's The Death of General Wolfe of 1770, a significant year for Cook and Australia. Bennett aimed to open up interpretation. He worked in a postmodern mode of joining up multiple possible meanings, like a hall of mirrors, where everything differs from its expected appearance. Bennett usually chose to use images that were already copies. The Cook image itself was endlessly copied. Bennett clearly acknowledged that he was an appropriation artist and left his sources transparent as part of a visual language or a visual system that comes out of a colonial story. The history paintings, such as this one, show Bennett determined to unsettle ideas like terra nullius, but include ambivalence and irony, as if the artist is an outsider in his own world. And I just want to mention one of these final history paintings, quite an important one for Gordon. With 9 ricochets, Fall Down Black Fella, Jump Up White Fella of 1990, Bennett entered into a local contemporaneous debates and international discourses about artistic appropriation and irony, both techniques that he used himself. In this work, he highlighted these strategies' limitations with his own open-ended and forceful critique, as well as continuing his representation of histories. This painting was a response to a number of debates of the day, including the idea of white Aboriginality employed by non-Indigenous writers and artists to situate Australian art and artists relative to the Western art canon, or discussion emanating from Europe and Northern USA, in which Australian European artists were seen as provincial. This is a complex painting with many details that Bennett borrowed from multiple sources. Some of those include an 18th century Australian scene of an Indigenous massacre, bloodied by Bennett with red paint, several paintings by Australian artist Imance Tillers, an image by 19th century Indigenous artist Tommy McRae, constructivist style painting, and even Marcel Duchamp's shots in The Bride Stripped Bare by her bachelor's even of 1915 to 23. With this work, Bennett comments on how ideologies of power and perception continue to colonise, destroy, or impact on identity and culture, especially of Indigenous people, and therefore have an impact in real life. The painting won him the Moët and Chandon Prize, which involved a residency in Epinay in France and was highly significant for his practice.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with Zara this afternoon to take you through some of the works in the exhibition. My name's Abigail Bernal, as Zara's already said. I'm going to start by talking about Culture Bag of 1992, which is the second of two important installations by Bennett in the exhibition. So Zara's talked about Psychodrama earlier. Culture Bag hasn't been seen since it was on display in the early 1990s in Brisbane. It was first exhibited as part of an exhibition entitled A Black History, and was shown both at Bellis Gallery in Brisbane and Sutton Gallery in Melbourne. This repeated phrase, a black history, was written in black crayon across the gallery floor, and it surrounded the black weathered suitcase that you can see filled with shards of broken beer bottles embedded in plaster of Paris and resting on a central plinth in the middle of the room. As the exhibition progressed, the text was gradually worn away. The Culture Bag speaks both to the cutting nature of racial prejudices and the burden of stereotypes, as well as to the erasure of Aboriginal culture and obscured histories. Another significant work from the following year, 1993, is Bloodlines, recently acquired for qagoma.qld.gov.au collection. This work continues from the history paintings with the appropriation of Jackson Pollock, which Zara has discussed earlier. So Bloodlines is one of the largest of Bennett's Welt works, a series of black monochrome paintings, as well as a group of videos and objects. And in each of these works, his mode of working was to cover an abstract painting in the style of Jackson Pollock with overpainted in black to take on the appearance of scarred skin. On several occasions, he pointed to the inspiration for the series as a photograph showing the heavily scarred back of an emancipated African slave taken in the United States in 1863. In Bloodlines, Bennett once again draws on the triptych format associated with depictions of the crucifixion. The left and right panels showed the red lines that echo Bennett's own handprints. The act of cutting into the red underpainting alludes to scarification and bloodletting as a cultural practice, while the center is occupied by a tangle of red oxide-stained nooses, which point to the ongoing issue of Aboriginal deaths in custody. These black scarified works proved a very fruitful source of investigation for Bennett, and they inspired several works over the following years, including his two single-channel video performances, DUH, or Down Under Homie of 1994, and Performance with Object for the Expiation of Guilt, 1995, reworked in 1996. In DUH, on the left-hand side here, Bennett is dancing along to Race War, a 1993 track by rapper Ice-T, and he wears a black suit and white bird mask, standing on a Pollock-inspired canvas, which he painted himself. The video shows Bennett's playful humor, as well as his great dance skills, even while it addresses serious issues. It also references the performance works of modernist Yves Klein and Pollock's own ritualistic method of painting. In contrast, Performance with Object is much more confronting. For this work, Bennett wore the same black suit, but this time his head was wrapped in bandages with only his eyes visible. On the floor in front of him is a box painted with the same black scarified canvas that we see in Bloodlines, this time scaled to his own body. Holding a large stockman's whip, Bennett circles it menacingly, alternately hurling racist abuse at it and speaking seductively. It was around this time also that Bennett began to work using a methodology of working in series to explore ideas, as well as quoting and sampling repeated elements from his own work. So the mirror paintings of 1994 to 1995 are indicative of this, and there are 5 of these paintings in the show. From 1995, he also began to engage with Australian modernist artist Margaret Preston, now quite a controversial figure because of her appropriation of designs from Aboriginal ceremonial objects, such as shields, as well as indicating the use of these patterns in home decor items from rugs to blankets and vases. Preston also made a series of woodcuts in the 1950s. in which Aboriginal people have become grotesque caricatures, small black stick figures that she repeated throughout the series. In this particular group of works from 1995, Bennett used simplified and reduced designs from Preston's Australian Legend series of the 1950s, enlarging and isolating them against a black background. Recontextualizing Preston's decorative designs allowed him to turn the tables, ironically drawing attention to and reversing her appropriation. His dialogue with Preston would continue with several series, such as the Home Decor, Preston and Destil, and Home Decor Algebra works of 1996 to 1999. In these paintings, overlapping grids in primary structures refer to Piet Mondrian and Destil once again, and this gives structure to the disparate elements that form part of the canvas, with references to Basquiat and to Philip Gaston. In the background, you can see the mechanical Bende dot screen reproduced, which he achieved by spray painting through a metal grid with perforated holes. So this series also marked Bennett's first experimentation with Photoshop editing software, which was quite unusual and important to him at the time, because it enhanced his practice of layering and sampling and his use of quotation. So in this painting here, Home Decor Algebra Ocean of 1998, you can see clearly how he's used this process of sampling and quotation. On the left, the bearded figure in a red robe is taken from Preston's print Noah's Ark of 1950, in which she placed biblical scenes and recognizably Australian landscapes. The original print you can see at the feet of the Noah's figure. Behind his head are the cartoon-like Ku Klux Klan figures that populate the paintings of Philip Gaston, and a single eye signifying European perspective covers part of his body. On the right of the painting is one of Preston's caricatured black figures derived from her Australian Legend series. In place of this figure's head, Bennett has included a hybrid Basquiat style figure, and at his feet is the drowning explorer in search of a mythical inland sea, which Zara mentioned earlier with the history paintings. So between these two opposing men, one black and one white, lies a reproduction of Bennett's painting Possession Island of 1991, showing another comparable unequal encounter between two men belonging to the pages of history, in which Captain Cook claimed possession of Australia from Possession Island. Bennett likened this style of composition to rap music, as it similarly relies on improvisation and collage to address issues of power and identity. His ongoing fascination and engagement with Margaret Preston can also be seen in these quite late works, which he produced between 2009 to 2013, known as his Shield paintings colloquially. And for Bennett, these works and his engagement with Preston really allowed him to highlight the dark history that was an underside of the relationship between modernism and its periphery.
Thanks, Abby. As you've seen, Bennett took great delight in recombining existing images and artistic styles to find new life in images. And in the 1990s, he really developed and started off on a new body of work in dialogue with Haitian-American artist Jean-Michel Basquiat, who had passed away in 1988. Basquiat had been a role model for Bennett even earlier than this time, and he wrote that they, and I quote, shared experience as human beings living in separate worlds that each seek to exclude, objectify, and dehumanize the Black body and person. Both artists had a mutual interest in facets of urban culture, including rap music, as Abby's just mentioned, and a cut and paste aesthetic designed to comment on contemporary culture and to dismantle existing artistic categories. The notes to Basquiat compositions are complex and many. They feature layers of appropriated material. Bennett not only cites elements from Basquiat's works, but also mimics his urban graffiti style, his use of text, and the layering of images of the human figure. In between redrawn features of Basquiat paintings in these works are citations also from Bennett's own home decor works, again appropriating himself, including grids related to Piet Mondrian and de Stijl, Margaret Preston's imagined figures that Abby just talked about, images from Philip Guston paintings, and other motifs from art history and popular culture. In some works, Jackson Pollock joins the conversation with Basquiat as part of Bennett's comment on the entanglement of colonialism and art. Here in this painting, Notes to Basquiat self-portrait, the two artists' self-portraits are overlaid with heads and anatomy derived from Basquiat paintings. As Australian critic Jill Bennett explains, Bennett does not simply imitate or act as Basquiat, but rather, she says, is interested in how Basquiat's work might be encountered from a different place, and what happens when different accounts of history and experience are registered simultaneously within a given frame. Typically, the Notes to Basquiat works never resolve into a single narrative, but they produce connections between ideas, such as ideas of abstraction and figuration, relative and universal, or many other concepts as they pertain to both society and self. Bennett remained interested in history, though, in these works, as you'll see in these two paintings, inserting a local perspective now into the global. For example, in Notes to Basquiat, Australia Day reenactment of 1999 on the left, Bennett addresses the ongoing Australian colonial mindset. We see a Basquiat figure merged with Bennett's self-portrait, and on the right, Captain Cook and male stereotypes who surround the mirror and its leering face, the laughing monkeys and other chattering heads. These questioning and playful paintings stress a relativity of ideas and the operation of language as well, and the works certainly trouble the concept of originality. The paintings here show clearly Bennett's familiar word lists that he really worked with continuously from this time. The one in Australia Day, reenactment, musing on the idea of originality and copy, and also reinforcing the double-sided nature of the meaning of Australia Day. The word lists connect with Bennett's interest in postmodern theories of linguistics, and theories arguing that a word derives its meaning from the play of differences between itself and other groups of words or other words. On the right also is a painting Notes to Basquiat, Blackbirding, which references the historical enslavement of South Sea Islanders and history of working on sugar plantations in Australia, as well as how freedom was often traded for such basics in colonial societies. Bennett wrote in a posthumous letter to Basquiat that his intention with the Notes to Basquiat paintings was to, and I quote, communicate a basic underlying humanity to the perception of blackness in its philosophical and historical production within Western cultural contexts. The title of this amazing large-scale painting, Notes to Basquiat, Sycophantic Symphony or Subject Matters 2000, suggests Bennett's concern to the point of the operation and power of both language and images to define identity and existence. This painting particularly draws upon multiple artworks by Basquiat that reference ways of seeing and the power of the gaze to define a subject. Against a painterly background that almost appears as if it's seeping blood, Bennett combines allusions to the camera on the right, the mirror and the digital on the left. Also appearing amongst a cacophony of references are Basquiat's figures, Philip Guston heads again, historical racist advertising logos of Australian popular culture and the Goodo area, and elements from Bennett's own works, including his characteristic word lists, one in the centre comprising a string of words that have been used to stereotype people in Australia. This is a virtuoso example of Bennett working with Basquiat as one voice that questions the nature of perceptions and representations of others.
A group of Notes to Basquiat works from 2001 represent Bennett's last sustained engagement with Jackson Pollock and his legacy. Totem Lesson 2, Shaman and Bird show Bennett engaging with the figure of Pollock from a new angle. His paintings were actually part of a group of 10, all based on photographer and filmmaker Hans Numuth's iconic images of Pollock in action. each drawing directly on a different pose adopted by the American artist as he stretched across a floor-based canvas, holding a can of paint or a brush. In each of Bennett's paintings, Pollock is a tiny figure dressed in black or brown, largely featureless and surrounded by a blood red stain, suggesting an aura or monstrous shadow. Each painting is titled after an equivalent painting from Pollock's early Carl Jung-inspired works of the 1930s to 40s. Thus, Notes to Basquiat Bird, 2001, refers to Pollock's bird painting of 1938 to 41, of a totemic creature with a bird's body whose head is a large single eye. In Notes to Basquiat Totem Lesson 2, refers to Pollock's Totem Lesson 2 of 1945, which Bennett would have seen at the National Gallery of Art in Australia in Canberra. It's significant that he chose to refer to paintings prior to what has been described as Pollock's liberation from perspective. These works are especially ethnographic in their influences, with biomorphic figures based on totemic and mythic figures, rituals and ideographs drawn from Native American culture in the Western United States, and Pollock's own Jungian drawings produced during therapy sessions. By placing Pollock at the center, surrounded by a blood red aura in each of these works, Bennett draws attention to the troubling history of modernist abstraction and its often unacknowledged borrowings. While he still uses Pollock's all-over field in these paintings, the one element that is in single point perspective is the painting within the painting, each based on an actual work by Pollock. By placing these images together, Bennett questions Pollock's status as the quintessential modernist hero. In the same year, in 2001, the events of September 11 occurred. Al-Qaeda's attack on New York's World Trade Center formed the subject of Bennett's 9/11 series of works, of which you can see one here. Many of these were painted only a few months after the events. And in these paintings, Bennett explored cross-cultural anxiety and acts of power leading to violence and trauma. It's worth noting that the paintings reference signs and symbols that were already part of Bennett's language. They include buildings, flames, airplanes, the crucifix and the black angel here. And as Jill Bennett has mentioned, it's likely they were already in progress prior to the events of 9/11, and they afterwards took on new meanings and directions while Bennett completed them. At this time, Basquiat's vocabulary continued to inspire Bennett, enabling him to place the pain and trauma of 9/11 within a broader historical and global context. In the painting, you can see here, Notes to Basquiat, Jackson Pollock and his other. Pollock is a burnt figure with a fiery halo. He's shown battling with the black angel of history. Both figures come from a very early painting by Bennett from 1987, titled The Persistence of Language, completed while he was still at college. Here they imply the process of the Western unconscious forced to confront itself and the divisions inherent in ideas of self and other. On the right of the painting, elements from Pollock's Blue Poles of 1952, a frequent reference in Bennett's painting, as Zara has explained earlier, create an illusion of the collapsing towers engulfed in flames. Combined with other signs and symbols, including Islamic Shamsa patterns in the background and Arabic text within the flames, the iconography of this multi-layered work reflects the complexity of the events, as well as the artist's reflections on history as it unfolded before his eyes. Sorry.
After a decade and a half of art making, we now turn to a point in Bennett's career where he felt that mentally it was time to have a break from holding the world's colonialist thinking and its consequences to account in his work. And he gave up figuration or figurative painting to use only linear marks. He announced publicly that he did want to escape the burden of socio-political narrative and interpretations of his intent. Working with abstraction, which I think you can see he's always done in part of his work, but now totally turning to it as his full modes of presentation, meant focusing on the physical parameters of the canvas and colour combinations. Common to these paintings is the effect of a process where Bennett would load the paint with brush and drag it across the canvas in a continuous line until he reached his end point, the paint diminishing along the intensity as he went. While these works aren't narrative in any way, I think audiences still do interpret them, and we could imagine that his stripe works, which he painted until 2008, continue to act as mirrors, asking viewers to consider what they see. Bennett was always aware of the work of other artists working with related forms. And here, when we think about these paintings, we can think of American minimalist Frank Stella, for example, and across to artists such as our own Emily Ngware. And he was always interested in pattern, whether it was as a decorative device or as a metaphor for the system. And an interesting point, if you can visit the exhibition here in Brisbane, are the many sketches and watercolour paintings by Bennett that reveal his early and ongoing exploration of both Western and Indigenous languages of abstraction. These works haven't been seen before, and they've been kept in his studio until now. But the stripe paintings delve into and implicitly challenge his own relationships to such traditions. And they also question the authority of ideas behind Western abstraction and its drive towards purity, as well as the concept that Aboriginal art exists only in the past. Following this period spent painting abstract works, Bennett returned to his critical examination of accepted worldviews in several series prior to his untimely death in 2014. In the early years of his career as an artist, Bennett wrote that although he knew it was foolish, he was trying to paint one painting that will change the world, to stimulate openness towards established cultural and social and even spiritual perspectives, and to come to terms with the past. In the abstraction paintings, which you can see here 3 of, from 2010 to 13, he returns to his personal visual language to expose essentialism and to visually disrupt fixed concepts of identity again, thinking about race and citizenship and therefore self and humanity. But in the background of these paintings is one kind of abstraction. You can see a small grid, an illusionistic device that can even be found earlier in some of the notes to Basquiat paintings. And it also resembles raak, or a style of cross-hatching in certain Aboriginal art. And it forms an optical field similar to the dots that were underlying many of the home decor paintings. The terms identified with each of these figures include words like citizen, migrant, alien, or others such as native, indigene, colonist, city dweller, fringe dweller, and are about how we categorise people and use words to define identity. The portraits themselves are everyman figures from Bennett's Notes to Basquiat works, combined with stylised images in the pink of figures which include Halle Berry, Justin Bieber and Tony Blair, Bob Geldof, Pauline Hanson, and other figures like teen actors Miranda Cosgrove and Dave Franco, all lifted from popular magazines. Each of these superimposed images questions us, the viewers, again about these concepts that Bennett's using here, and how it's decided who fulfills these terms.
As Zara mentioned earlier, the works on paper are a really central feature of the exhibition. There are approximately 100 in the exhibition, and they create a kind of heart or centre to it, and have a kind of unusual means of display, which we hope you'll be able to visit and see for yourselves. Drawing was very important to Bennett's thinking and to the development of his visual language overall. He often worked up ideas in notebooks, made drafts and lists on paper, and it's possible to see the independence between his expression of his paintings and installation works and the ideas generated in his notebooks. The group of works on paper in the exhibition offer a kind of mind map of mostly finished and informal imagery in which the artist's hand and his exploration of ideas come through very strongly. Many of these drawings were the basis for subsequent images that appeared in Bennett's paintings as part of a visual iconography that he deployed and revisited as required, as to achieve the relationship of elements essential to his intended meaning. The works include early works from 1987 while he was still at college, as well as watercolour studies which show his engagement with artists like Basquiat, with the various languages of abstraction, as Zara mentioned earlier, as well as popular culture, including, for example, rap music, NWA, or Niggas with an Attitude here, and as well as Public Enemy, and some very quirky, interesting drawings which frequently reappear in his paintings, as particularly the Notes to Basquiat series of works.
The exhibition Unfinished Business offers insights into Bennett's visual language and thinking right across his career. And I think, as we've indicated, it includes a number of works that are rarely seen, including paintings, and as Abby's just been talking about, the works on paper from his studio. Gordon Bennett understood the role that images play in shaping the world, and that art holds power to encourage self-reflection and possibly change minds. He wrote that, "I see my paintings as chinks in the armour of the boundaries to let in a little different sunlight or a little different darkness." We were committed to this exhibition and to the idea or the relevance of the title Unfinished Business, as we believe that Bennett's work remains as significant now as it was when it was painted. In a society where daily we're reminded of acts of racism, Indigenous deaths in custody, the nation's inability to have Indigenous sovereignty or voices in government, Bennett's is an ethical voice concerned to communicate the need for humanity and self-reflection in our contemporary perceptions. His art is inventive, it's ethical, humorous, but always unrelenting in its questioning of how we relate to others, holding up a mirror to us, the public and his audience.